with the closer event of PMI Chapter Exchange Season 2. And this is our event 10 of 2021. And overall, 17 events considering 2020 and 2021. So yes, welcome everyone. And let me share my screen. There you go. And I am Priya Patra. I am the Vice President Outreach of PMI Mumbai Chapter. I am the host of this session today. I do also have Pierre Axel, our chapter leader from South Africa chapter. Pierre, would you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi everybody, this is Pierre from PMI South Africa.
And we do also have Rushang, PMI Gujarat chapter. Rushang.
Everyone, I am Rushang Bhuj and I volunteer for PMI Gujarat chapter.
We do also have Damike, our chapter leader from Sri Lanka chapter.
Everyone, I am Damika from Sri Lanka.
And Arif from PMI Indonesia chapter.
Hey everyone, good to see you all.
And Yuda from Puget Sound chapter.
Hi everyone, how's it going?
And over to you, Pierre, to welcome everyone for this grand closure event.
Okay, so welcome everybody, welcome again. So my name is Pierre, I'm PMI Chapter Exchange Liaison for PMI South Africa. And welcome to our very last event of PMI Chapter Exchange Season 2, which is Emotional Intelligence in Project Management. So just to give you, I'm not going to get into too much details, but as you know, PMI Chapter Exchange is a virtual collaboration program where we host a monthly event like this one, a monthly professional development event. But my colleague Priya will get into much details in a little bit. It's an event, it's a program that we run along with 20 other chapters around the world. So we have PMI Indonesia, PMI Gujarat, PMI Zimbabwe, PMI New Zealand, Phoenix, Czech Republic, South Africa, Netherlands, Sri Lanka, South Florida, PMI United Kingdom, Lima Peru, Sao Paulo, Southern Alberta, Kenya, Ghana, Poland, Greece, Puget Sound, and our supporting chapters, PMI United Arab Emirates chapter, PMI Mozambique, and many other supporting chapters. So that's for me. I hope you guys also have been able to take the Menti.com poll. Today we had 1,905 registration across the globe, spread among 92 countries. So that's, like Priya was saying, it's actually a record that we have broken, and we are very, very pleased to have you guys today.
Thank you, Pierre. And now for the house rules, Damike, over to you.
Thanks, Priya. Please go to this link we have shared in the chat for Menti poll and add your poll. So the meeting is being recorded. If you are uncomfortable in any ways, you may choose not to attend, else you are welcome to continue. Please make sure that your mic is on mute during the session. Your noise-making devices are put on silent mode. Everyone here in this event are speaking on our individual capacity. Our views do not represent our organization's views in any ways. Over to you, Priya.
Yeah, and with this, ladies and gentlemen, join your hands together to welcome Tony Appleby, who is the chair of the board at Project Management Institute. Tony does not need any introduction, but yet I will say a few words about him. He's passionate about organizational project management, and he helps organizations across the globe to achieve their business objectives. He has worked with senior leaderships and country executives of Fortune 10 and Global 2000 companies, for nonprofit, for government, uh, and many more. He enjoys traveling and learning about cultures of people around the world. Interesting, isn't it? So that's why he is the best person to kickstart our closing event of the year. So over to you, Tony, to take it all away.
Thank you so much, Priya. I'm going to share a presentation deck that has a video, and I understand that video content sometimes may be problematic, and I will send to Priya an uploaded link so that that can be shared if there are problems with the video. But I want to thank you for allowing me to join you at today's PMI Chapter Exchange. It's truly my pleasure to be a part of today's program and to represent the PMI Board of Directors. And my thanks absolutely have to go out to the 20 chapters who make this event a reality for 2 seasons now, with leaders representing just about every corner of the globe. The Chapter Exchange program is in my mind's eye, really an exceptional concept. And I applaud all of the organizers for your creativity, your dedication to the profession, and for, well, advancing our collective ability to meet and grow and develop our professional development skills so that we can better serve organizations and communities where we live and work. And while I know that we all have a little Zoom fatigue these days, and as much as I would adore being able to be in a room with each and every one of you here today, 1,000 plus, it's also kind of neat that we can all be connected without leaving our homes. And I'm still wearing my slippers, so that makes me happy. Now, I'm pleased to be here today to help kick things off for a discussion on your topic of emotional intelligence. And I think that you have expertly identified that today's project professionals need to effectively cultivate the ability to work with others across cultures and geographies in order to succeed. And it's kind of ironic that in an era of virtual work, with an increased focus on technology and with all the digital disruption that's going on around us, that emotional intelligence is actually more critical than ever. That the world is changing. Technologies are disrupting how we do business. Businesses are changing, and the need for project managers to get their heads and their hearts wrapped around all of this change is critical to success. And that's going to require practitioners to become leaders. And to be effective as leaders, we need to hone several of our soft skills, or what we at PMI are calling our power skills. So by way of an example, the virtual environment has allowed us to be perhaps closer to our employees and our colleagues than ever before, with the ability to just jump on a video call at any time. But that video call requires additional focus on empathy and emotional intelligence to pick up on cues over our computer screens. And those cues are harder to decipher virtually. And I trust that some of today's dialogue will talk to these challenges and how we can adapt our thinking and our behaviors and our ways of working to better connect with and support and lead our project teams. Because, and this is really important, that in the future, it will be the professionals who develop and refine these skill sets who are the best equipped to act as change makers and transformative leaders in their own organizations. And we're only just beginning to see now how the pandemic will shift long-term trends in terms of how teams organize and deliver work, accelerating the shift towards what PMI calls the project economy. And that's a future, if you haven't heard the term yet, that's, in my mind's eye, already emergent, right there on the immediate horizon, in which work and value is increasingly delivered in the form of projects. And PMI's annual Pulse of the Profession research shows how organizations thrived amidst these types of changes this past year. And if you haven't done so already, I really encourage you to navigate to PMI.org and download that 2021 report. So there is already a fundamental shift in how organizations and their teams plan and perform their work. And the research here underscores the importance of professional competencies such as emotional intelligence. All right, so this is a slightly busy slide, but you don't need to read it all in detail. I'm going to highlight just a little bit here. Hopefully most of you are already familiar with PMI's talent triangle. What you're seeing here, though, is an early version of how that talent triangle is evolving as PMI learns more about what practitioners need to know and learn and be adept at in order to be successful in the future. Well, I say future, but I'm of the opinion that the future is already here. But at PMI, we leverage significant research to better understand what makes project managers successful in today's changing work environments. And we're updating this talent triangle to reflect what we're learning. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more communication from PMI about this in the upcoming months, so look for that, but you're getting a bit of a sneak preview here. But what I'd like for us to focus on in terms of today's chapter exchange, as I just mentioned a few moments ago, that at PMI, we include the people-centric capabilities under the term power skills, reflected on the right-hand side of this slide. We used to call them soft skills, but they're so crucial today, more than ever, in an era when so much work is automated and done in different ways than before, and just plain evolving, that we needed to elevate the name from soft skills to power skills to reflect the importance of these abilities. Our research found that high-performing organizations dialed up these power skills in a big way, especially collaborative leadership. It's the #1 skill that they're prioritizing. And collaborative leadership requires a fairly high EQ, or emotional quotient, to be an effective collaborative leader. And you likely already know the pandemic has changed the emphasis on what it takes to be successful. The human cost of the crisis has made it more important than ever to connect with authenticity. And the world is in a period of such significant change. It takes uniquely human qualities to navigate the increasingly complex and ambiguous challenges that we all face as practitioners. So let me close this brief introduction with a few takeaways that I want for you to keep in mind as you go into today's learnings. And I'm going to be listening in because, not that I need a refresher, it's just I always love learning, and there's always something new to learn with these dialogues. So thank you for inviting me. So first and foremost, upskilling your power skills has a huge return on investment. That includes emotional intelligence, of course, but also collaborative leadership, adaptability, an innovative mindset, and empathy. And now more than ever, secondly, it's critical to tailor your approach to your project delivery efforts in ways that best fit the context of your work. Organizations that are strictly traditional with waterfall, or are purely agile, with disciplined, agile, or whatever mechanism they use, tend not to be as effectual as those that tailor their needs. So we're seeing an increase in hybrid approaches to project work. And projects are how work gets done, increasingly in the project economy. And that's going to be the case more and more moving forward as that project economy becomes entrenched. And we are seeing that in so many businesses. More people than ever are going to need project skills in places across our organizations and our communities than ever before. And we want PMI, obviously, to be the place where they come to ensure their success. So I'm going to take just a minute, if you'll indulge me, and make a plug. So part of emotional intelligence, of course, is having empathy for others. And what I'd like to do is emphasize that we've got at PMI, our Hours for Impact initiative, which is calling on our global community to pledge 100,000 hours of service in support of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals this year. And PMI is a member of the UN Global Compact, if you weren't aware. We signed a formal commitment supporting the 17 SDGs, which address, if you're not familiar, the world's most urgent challenges, everything from climate change to poverty to access to education, and so much, much more. And who better to address these challenges, even at the local level, where actually they're more impactful than just trying to tackle the global, import. Who's better than project managers? Everybody on this call. So you can learn more at pmi.org/hours for impact. And if you've already done some volunteer work this year related to the SDGs, please still go to the site and let us know what you did and the impact that you had, and we can collect those hours that you've already put in. So let me just end with this. The world faces big challenges. And if the past year has taught us anything, it's that everything is possible when we connect a vision for the future with an understanding of how to turn that vision into a reality. And the world is changing, but we aren't just reacting to change. Organizations need people who can drive that change. And PMI stands ready to empower change makers to do just that, including each and every one of you. I wish you all the very best with your emotional intelligence discussions today. And I'm, as I mentioned, very much looking forward to learning and listening and sharing any thoughts myself. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Tony. Yes, world cannot be reactive. They have to be proactive, of course, and only change makers can make it happen. Let me look into the chat window to see if there is any question for Tony. I don't see any. So, well, Tony, thank you very much for your keynote, and that was a powerful one. So, everyone, let us give him a virtual applause for opening this closer event in such a great note. All right.
Thank you, Priya. I'm going to switch to attendee mode.
Oh, no, you can stay on the panelist mode and hear our discussion, what our
Awesome.
SMEs
Thank
have
you.
to talk about. Yes. So what is PMI Chapter Exchange, right? Do I need to say more about it? Well, I don't think so. We have talked a lot about it in the past 10 months. So let me recap the 2 seasons that we had so far. So how does it look like? There you go. 2 seasons. Yes. 17 events. 12,000 registrations. Can you imagine? 92 countries. Wow. And 5 continents. Isn't that huge? Yes. And thanks to everyone. Thanks to each and everyone who registered, who attended and provided feedback to make us better event after event. And thanks to all the chapter leaders who have worked tirelessly. And you just see a few of them on the video, but there are a lot of other chapter leaders who work behind the scenes and who have worked tirelessly with passion, conviction to make it all happen. Yes, and we have shared our stories across as well. In August, we talked about our initiative in the Leaders Pathway, which is the Asia Pacific Leaders Meeting, along with Damike, Brushank, and Arif. In October 9, we did share a story in the Global LIM. Late that month, we also presented in the Region 16 LIM, along with our chapter leaders from Africa, Gian, Carl, Ernest, and of course, Pierre. We are also presenting in the Project Explorer Conference, which is an European conference in the chapter collaboration track. There is a special track there, chapter collaboration, along with Madeline from Netherlands and Anita from Poland. So please do join us and cheer us up. And without much ado, let me introduce our panelist of the day. Not the panelist, only the session moderator of the day. Sorry about that. Stephen Fuller. He is the president of Blue Spear Solutions. And Stephen is a coach to executives, to portfolio, program, project managers, business analysts, and social innovators. Given the pace of change, as Tony also said, reaction is actually the trend, but reaction can only lead to survival. Steve's goal is to guide in this rapidly changing world based on unique insights through technology innovation, neurosociology research, and project and program course creation and enhancement. And with this, Steve, I hand over the virtual dais to you to start the session. Steve, are you speaking on mute?
I got muted when Tony took over. So there, you should all be able to hear me now. So thank you. I am privileged and honored to have been asked to be the moderator for this esteemed panel. All of us have really great background. I'm going to go around and ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and provide their background or interest. During her polite introduction to me, Priya used the term neurosociology, which is my avocation, passion, and has now become my career as a coach and consultant. So I'm just going to quickly define neurosociology and why it's so important to the background of emotional intelligence, making emotional intelligence one of my expertise and passions. Neurosociology, the neuro part is about the individual anatomy, physiology, chemistry, psychology of the human being. And the sociology part is sociology, is anthropology, it's archaeology, it's an understanding of the history of humanity, and they are interdependent. And one of the question sets that's come up amongst the panels in several different ways is about culture. So when we talk about culture, culture is developed by societies, but then incorporated into our own beliefs, behaviors, and precedences or preferences. And so it's really understanding the blending of the two and how that impacts us as individuals and how we as individuals impact society. And really that's what project managers do. We're the ones that take the knowledge and new ideas and deliver them to the audiences to try to help that become a new part of our cultural standards. Without my talking any bit more, so we use every moment of the time to try to focus on emotional intelligence today, I'm going to go down the list of panelists that I have here and have each of them introduce themselves in no specific order. Frenio, Spoladar, if you'd introduce yourself and your background, Frenio, we'd appreciate that. And I'm not hearing a Frenio, so.
I think he's trying to unmute himself.
Okay.
We can move to the next panelist and come back to our
I will do that. We'll come back to him.
I lost my connection. Sorry. I lost my connection for a minute. Sorry. Steve, may you repeat your question, please?
Sure. If you'd introduce yourself and your background or interest in emotional intelligence.
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor for me for being here. I am Frenio Spolador and speaking from Sao Paulo, Brazil. I am IT director in Eco Rodovias, that's a road concession company here. I have been working here for 20 years. And during these years, I had the experience of different hundreds of projects per year, from the simple ones to the complex ones. Then I hope to share a little bit of my experience here. And thank you very much. I know that I will learn a lot of other panelists as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Frenio. Our next panelist is Rohit Chaudhary. If Rohit, go ahead and introduce yourself, your background or interest in emotional intelligence.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever it is. My name is Rohit Chaudhary, and I'm joining from Mumbai, India. I head the IT project management function in India's largest company as of now, and I have done so in a few other equally big companies as well. Prior to joining the profession of project management, which has been 18 years now, I have been a veteran where I fought a war. And so I wore a uniform for about 15 years before that. I'm happy to be here representing this part of the world, which is rich with a lot of spiritual knowledge, and a topic like emotional intelligence is close to my heart. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Welcome, Rohit. Mustafa, if you introduce yourself. So this is, I might butcher his last name, my apologies, Mustafa Hafizoglu. So if you introduce yourself, your background and interest in emotional intelligence.
Thank you, Stephen. Your pronunciation is perfect. I'm Mustafa Hafizoglu from Turkey. I'm very excited to be with such a diverse panelists and attendees. So thank you very much for inviting me. I'm a barrier remover, generally we call project manager, strategy implementation professional, and knowledge management expert, and a mentor. I'm co-founder and past president of PMI Turkey chapter. I'm now currently working as a program director in SDT Space and Defense Technologies with a 23 years of experience in aerospace and defense industry. My passion is leadership, and that's why emotional intelligence is the greatest part of that passion. I see the strongest tool to be a leader. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. And our fourth panelist is Toriro Shaza. Toriro, if you'd introduce yourself, give your background and your interest in emotional intelligence or contributions today.
Thanks, Steve. I am Toriro Chaza from Zimbabwe. I am an engineer by profession, mainly in the telecom industry for about 40 years, working for a mobile company in the last few years as a director in the project management office. But right now, I run my own company, which is Torch PMO, which is a training and consultancy company in project management. I've got a PMP, I'm a PMP, and I also got a Scrum Master certification from another organization, and an MBA. I reckon that's me. Okay.
Welcome. I want to encourage all of our attendees today to look back at the meeting invitation and the LinkedIn connections for all of the panelists, including myself. We won't have enough time in the hour plus that we've got to answer questions, to discuss and support all of you, but we are all open to connecting with all of the audience to continue the discussion, either by Zoom sessions, email, chat, etc. After this session. We will try to cover the many questions and topics that we've got today. I will point out here, make sure the panelists, if you have a question or a comment for us, that you type it in the Q&A portion of the session rather than chat, because that's where we'll watch for additional questions, feedback, and try to make sure we answer as many topics as we can for all of you today. The basic layout that we're going to try to approach so that everybody knows this, we gave this and had some opportunity to visit with the panelists earlier in the week and a little bit this morning, is we'll talk about first the definition or our different interpretations of emotional intelligence. Then we'll talk about how one can develop skills or understand the process of learning to be better at emotional intelligence. We'll then talk about general applications of emotional intelligence to project management. There were several questions about different values or the importance of emotional intelligence, perhaps compared to IQ, change intelligence, and many of the other factors coming out today. Then there were a large set of questions about interpreting behaviors as being part of emotional intelligence or not. So we'll talk a little bit about how people perceive or misperceive the application of emotional intelligence in projects or social environments. Then there were questions about comparing and contrasting emotional intelligence. And if we have time, we'll get to those kinds of leadership. So kind of the compare, contrast, the overlap. And I would love to get to it if we can, and they may be answered by panelists in between as examples, specific applications of emotional intelligence in environments like emotional intelligence specifically in virtual teams, or emotional intelligence specifically in agile environments. And I put that at the bottom only because emotional intelligence is such a large topic that I want to make sure that all of the expertise by everybody is shared. And with no further ado, I'm going to go to the first of the questions. And although I gave you the themes, I'm using the questions that were submitted by the committee, by panelists, or by any of you. I'll watch Q&A as different panelists speak. So the first one to go around here, and I'm just going to go down that same order to give everybody opportunity, is how do each of you define emotional intelligence? So if Frenio, if you'd like to stop, how do you define or describe emotional intelligence? I can't hear you. You might be muted again temporarily, Frenio. Still can't hear you. So you're on mute still. I check the bottom of your session or your mic. Got it. Try it again. Can't hear you. Yeah, I'm going to do this. You go ahead and play with that one. You think you've got it, you can just say test to hear it. But to save time, I'm just going to go ahead and skip next to Rohit. Rohit, if you want to describe it while Frenio is working on his microphone.
Steve. A very practical definition to me would start with being aware of emotions. So emotional awareness is the first step in beginning to define emotional intelligence. And that awareness could be in two parts: the awareness of my own emotions and awareness of the emotions of those around me whom I'm interacting with, right? So that is the first step, awareness. Now, with that awareness, what do I do with that awareness is use that awareness to choose an appropriate response. And I'm being careful in selecting the word response and not just, it could be any form of communication. So using that awareness to choose an appropriate response. And third and the last step would be learning it to an extent, to a point that I can not just use the awareness and the appropriate response, but use both of these as a tool to make my communication more effective, right? So that to me is a short practical definition of emotional intelligence. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. That's an awesome definition, Rohit. Frenio, do you want to try your microphone again? Not hearing you. If you need to reset your microphone or whatever, or Priya, if you want to try to help him make sure we can participate, I'm just gonna so we don't lose any time. Mustafa, if we get your definition or description of emotional intelligence.
On top of Rohit's great definition, I will simply say that emotional intelligence is a chance for us, for humans, to become a leader. So it's a great tool if you'd like to get into the leadership journey. So it's very crucial.
Awesome. Thank you. And Toriro, if you got an input, additional descriptions.
Yes. Adding to what Rohit said, we talked about emotions, but I also believe it is important to have awareness of the expectations and desires of the others also. Well, not just the emotions, but their expectations and their desires, so that I'm able to manage myself and also collaborate in that team effort.
Awesome. I'm going to give Frenio one more opportunity here, see if we can get
Yes. Can you hear me right now?
Perfect. You got it going.
Okay. I don't know what happened here, but as I was trying to say before, it's a complex concept, but in a few words, I feel that is the ability that a person has to deal with the emotions and the feelings that they have facing different situations, different cultures, different conflicts during their journey. And this ability that is important in project management is very important. We'll talk this later, but this is the concept that I feel in a few words.
Awesome. I'm going to it's my technical background. I don't want to monopolize the time here, but to help everybody get what I will call, I guess, a technical discussion behind emotional intelligence, a definition behind it for context, is we are all animals. We're creatures, and our brain or neural system is devised in layers. And the primitive part of our brain is for survival. That's where Priya introduced me as saying reaction. And our neurons react in 0.1 to 0.2 seconds. It's subconscious. We do not have the ability to control that. It's literally reaction to our environment. Fight, flight, faint, freeze, kind of. The next level of our brain, also at about 0.2 seconds response, still subconscious, is what we call the mammalian portion of the brain. Some people call it the monkey brain. it's also reactive, 0.2 seconds, and that's where our emotions are housed or couched. And so we cannot control our emotions. They're a reaction to a combination of our environment and our beliefs and perceptions. And so our neural mechanisms, our senses give input to us, whether it's our eyes, our hearing, our touch, and also our internal perceptions or beliefs. And our brain immediately makes comparisons to what we know, what we understand, and what we make comparisons about as being same or not same, at a simple basis of whether it's survival or not. You cannot control an emotion when it starts to come up. All you can do is, as was ideally pointed out, is be aware of that emotion and then attempt to manage it and move beyond it into, for instance, reflecting on how you will respond. So at its basic, simple description, anatomically, physiologically, emotional intelligence is being aware of your own emotions. And then as was also really adequately given in the description of it, being able to manage, right, or influence your reactions. Then secondly, being able to recognize somebody else's emotions without immediately reacting to them until you have the context. And as we said, it's social or cultural issues that actually bring into it the context, right, that we do interpretation of emotions. And we'll talk more about that as we go, but I'm trying to give that baseline for all of the panelists to be able to use their description. So the second question that we offer, which is to build on that first one, is, in general, how do you perceive that emotional intelligence is most relevant or should be applied to project management? Again, I'm going to go across the entire panel for this one. So I saw questions just from practical, how can project manager increase IA and how can PM use PM tool for better project results? So this is kind of, that's one of the questions that came in the Q&A that's related to try to kind of this question. So I'm just going to, again, this is an opportunity for everybody to speak. So I'll just start with a Frenio again. You know, in general, how do you perceive emotional intelligence is most relevant to project management or its application in that space?
Yeah, as perceiving emotional intelligence, the project is a tough task during the every single day that we have here, because sometimes you are not dealing only with the emotions that we have as a project manager, but also with the team and in the perception that you must have from the team emotions and how they are dealing with each situation. That is something important. Then perceive that emotions that the other have and the understand the values of the person, because you're talking about the culture, behaviors, and values. And if you have different values during a project, it's very hard to deal with intelligent emotion, because it's a conflict that is hard to deal. If you have shared values, it's much easier to do that. Then pay attention to these signals. If the values are the same, if the behavior are the same, and the culture that you have is okay, that's much easier to bring a very good project management during our day.
Great answer, awesome. Rohit, do you want to, and it looks like he might have dropped for a minute, but if he's available, I would say, Rohit, do you want to provide input to that as well, or build on Frenio's answer? And he may not be here. I'm seeing a pause button on his.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay,
you can
sorry.
try, Rohit, if you're.
Yes, just to add on what has already been said. I was actually glad when we saw Tony's slide earlier, a few minutes back, and where the power skills directly fell on the side of intrapersonal, skills. So obviously, a project manager is a good project manager only if the intrapersonal skills are strong. And to that extent, I think somewhere, while this is a PMI forum, I know that in many of our literatures in the PM books of knowledge, and we have not given enough importance to this aspect of emotional, the emotions that play in managing projects in the past. And I remember doing an exercise earlier where I would search for words like motivation or maybe gratitude, things like that in that book of knowledge, and there are very few occurrences of that. So I'm glad we are recognizing that, and it is increasingly important in the world of today. Thank you, Steve.
Awesome. And as you see, all the panelists are building upon each other and supplementing, so that we hope we're answering some of your questions that are coming in as we proceed. Mustafa, do you want to build upon that in terms of your experience or ideals for the addition of emotional intelligence into project management or the project manager's knowledge set?
May I just remind what Tony mentioned, talent triangle. He mentioned the power skills. So how are we going to gain those power skills? So emotional intelligence is a good way to build those skills. And I have recently read and research regarding with the role of emotional intelligence in project success. And there were 3 key results. Emotional intelligence positively influenced managing conflicts, communication, and trust. So this research shows that we can increase trust within our team, increase communication, as well as manage conflict with the help of emotional intelligence.
I totally agree. Thank you for that extra contribution. And Toriro, we're going to give you an opportunity here to build upon, as an overview, how you perceive that emotional intelligence benefits projects or project managers.
Thank you, Steve. I'm just going to go back to the interpersonal skills or the power skills that have already been talked about by Mustafa and the team. I see it has got communications, negotiation, emotional intelligence, teamwork, adaptability, problem solving, active listening, crisis and conflict management. All those things I see either they are a subset of emotional intelligence itself, or I could say emotional intelligence is the cornerstone of all those groups of interpersonal skills as such. So it is very vital for a project manager or a person who's aspiring to be a project manager to acquire those skills. Otherwise, the risk of not acquiring, I reckon you can actually directly link it to project failure or team effort collapsing as such.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I'm going to just try to glue it back together here before we go to kind of our next question or topic. If you think about it in this particular fashion, a part of recognizing our awareness of our emotions and to be able to try to manage those suggests that we pause before reacting. And so many of us have heard this concept of before you get angry or before you react to something, count to 10. And then there's a great book by Mel Robbins called The 5-Second Rule, which she suggests before taking action or to inspire yourself to positive action to count down from 5. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launch. Because we said that your reaction, your emotions are in 0.1 or 0.2 seconds, by learning simple techniques, like for instance, counting backwards before you take action, you are causing the emotional response to be delayed until you have the opportunity to engage what we call our frontal cortex or our cognitive processes, so that we are reflecting on how we want to act, behave, or respond before we do so. And so just building on Toriro's comment, that simple human individual ability as a leader to pause, not to stop our emotions, not to throw them away, not to incorporate, not to fail to incorporate them in how we're reacting, not to fail to respond to another person's emotions if they're angry, sad, happy, but to incorporate that into our response requires an ability that only humans fully possess. And that's to choose the behaviors through reflection that we will best apply in affecting change. And so it literally, emotional intelligence and the tools of emotional intelligence become the infrastructure upon which all of the other kind of power skills are built. You can't do problem solving unless you get into your, more reflective, higher cognitive power. And so you have to be able to set aside some of the fears, the angers, the joy, and the focus on single things to make sure that you're comprehensively looking at all of the aspects of a project. So it really is the glue. And I'm talking more from my neurosociology technical research background to try to, help you get the framework to see that when we're talking about the commonality behind it, it's not just an opinion, it's actually hard science. We're talking about the application across the panel here, rather than trying to argue whether or not emotional intelligence is real. Although emotional intelligence was first introduced about 1995 in a book by Daniel Goleman, and it was a social skill only, and it didn't incorporate all of the personal skills that we need to essentially learn to apply emotional intelligence. And so the next question that's on the list here, and I'm going to go to Mustafa first because he's the one who volunteered to at least initially answer this, is according to most, emotional intelligence is a skill. How long does it take to learn emotional intelligence, and can anyone learn it equally? So Mustafa, you volunteered first to answer this. We'll start with you.
Thank you very much. First of all, may I just share my experience regarding with how I met with emotional intelligence. So it was 2009 when I was selected for PMI's Leadership Institute Masterclass. And when we started the masterclass, the first thing we have been presented was emotional intelligence, because leadership is a journey. And in order to go through this journey, you have to improve your skills. And emotional intelligence is introduced as a toolkit to gain those skills. So the first requirement was you have to really want by yourself to get improved, to go through those leadership journey. So you cannot teach someone who is not really willing to these types of skills. And if you decide to go through this journey, emotional intelligence will be your greatest toolkit. And what about the time? Actually, it's a never-ending journey. But once you start, you see the quick wins, and those quick wins really motivate you to go through the remaining road. And it's been almost 12 or 13 years that I have started this journey, and I'm still on the journey. But when I look back at those days, I have learned lots of things, and my success in managing projects and programs has really increased. So I can share this experience with the audience.
Awesome. Would any other panelists, because none of them specifically said I want to try to tackle this, would any other panelists like to try to answer the question about, EQ being a skill, how to learn it, equal opportunity, etc.? If not, I'm happy to step in because of my feel I said I'd throw that, but I don't want to be the one answering every question. So I'm opening it to the other panelists if they'd like to raise a hand or insert here. Feel free to answer after I do, to jump in or throw your hands up. I will help you a little bit more because I was trained in emotional intelligence based on some of the work of Paul Ekman. I'll hold up his book, Emotions Revealed. Sorry if that's background on here. He is the one who put out a book in 2005 from which several television series, and the concept of being able to look at somebody's face and their micro movements or musculature to be able to identify their emotions. So it was the first practical application of this concept that we called emotional intelligence. And supposedly you could learn, right, how to read somebody else's face and whether they're happy or sad and what their expressions are. And I won't try to teach the whole thing, but if you look at somebody's face and you're trying to figure out whether they're happy, most people say, let's look for a smile. But he studied the micromusculature to recognize that raised eyebrows in the forehead, right, are more important than looking for somebody's teeth. Because in some cultures, showing your teeth is considered rude, and some people might have dental problems, etc. So smiles don't always involve the teeth. And so it's, there's an awesome smile from Toriro that we got, and amusement to my answer. But it's about perception, and our senses take in what we see from other people in that 0.1 or 0.2 seconds and immediately start to make judgments about whether somebody is angry, sad, etc. And so simply you can be taught the skills of emotional intelligence But I give my personal story. It took me 3 courses before, in the 3rd course, a coach sat down with me and said, you're having real difficulty understanding certain emotions in other people. You just don't recognize them in that micro moment. And so my strength was setting aside the reaction to emotions to try to reflect what emotions they're feeling before I responded. And that's a huge emotional intelligence power that I was told I had. But there were certain emotions that I just didn't get. So you're supposed to be able to tell when somebody's deceiving you or lying or trying to alter the subject or not address their own emotions. And I could not identify that at all. And so it took one-on-one work with the coach, who finally said, oh, wait, Steve, and I'm revealing part of myself here, so this is a little bit of an authenticity. I do not mean to offend anybody by this, so by all means, I apologize if it does. If it sets a trigger with any of you, that's emotional intelligence that can do that. They knew that I was raised by an alcoholic father and a codependent mother. And their facial expressions, because of their own inner conflict with me as the oldest child, I got mixed signals from them. I got them saying one thing with a happy or an angry on their face because of what they were dealing with in their own relationship. And I had no other references. And this is me as a baby, an infant, and a child. And so when I come into adulthood, my brain is already patterned neurologically to recognize certain expressions and emotions in people from a dysfunctional family environment, which meant that my instant reactions, my instant recognition of emotions wasn't there. That was an epiphany for me. And having that coach, that was in 2005, work with me, I now can see those emotions in other people. But here's why I say emotional intelligence can be learned by anyone as a skill set. But before you learn to become proficient, as Mustafa suggested, it is a journey. You have to start being willing to overlook your own behaviors, your own preferences, your own perceptions, most importantly, of the world and other people. So anybody can be taught emotional intelligence as a skill set, but you don't master proficiency until you are willing to overcome your own preconceptions in the process of doing it, which is what Mustafa suggested in terms of it's an ongoing journey. If you first start to learn emotional intelligence, you will start to see immediate gains, as Mustafa suggested, but you won't become proficient. That doesn't mean that you can take a week-long class and get certified and suddenly be, emotional intelligence certified, much like you could take a week of PMP training and learn and practice for several hours of study before you take the PMP. Emotional intelligence is not a certificate. It's a skill set that's ongoing. And the next question we're going to say is, how is EQ affected or related to a person's culture? And so I just want to preface this with, we might talk about tribes, we might talk about cultures, but I'm going to set the stage here. And Toriro and Rohit both suggested they were willing to answer this one. Don't take necessarily my framework as it, but think about this. All of us learned our preconceptions, right? Our perceptions and our belief systems from the family, the tribes, the community, and the cultures in which we were raised. And the more broadly you were exposed to that, you have a broad set of perceptions and beliefs. But if you fix on a particular belief system, a particular perception because of the culture in which you were raised, you will not recognize instantly somebody else's perception that they were given. And so you're interpreting based upon your perception, right? That's built into your brain, and you react to that. And simple example might be, how do you shake hands? Do you bow? Do you nod your head? All of the different ways that we greet people is an instant way to break ice between two people getting to know each other and try to learn about each other. Those simple actions cause different reactions instantaneously in us that cause discomfort. Discomfort is an emotion. And so the next question here, and I'm going to go to Toriro first, how is EQ affected or related to a person's culture? So if you want to go ahead and tackle that one for us.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I believe that a person with IQ will be aware of various cultural differences, especially in a multicultural setting. EQ is also the ability to learn beneficial behaviors and also unlearn toxic behaviors. For instance, I'm an African and I belong to a culture centered on collectivism. The word that has been made popular even by Mandela is called Ubuntu. So you find that most of the cultures in sub-Saharan Africa have got this word like Ubuntu. In my own culture, it's called Wunu, and it's really about collectivism. So I grew up in this collective, in a culture where there's collectivism. In other words, I am, because we all are, I'm part of a culture. So already there's collaboration within that culture, which to me, I would have actually possibly said emotional intelligence is equal to Ubuntu, for instance. But I've got to unlearn a lot of toxic behaviors because of what happened historically in the where I come from. For instance, there was slavery, there was colonization, which was brought in a Machiavellian, highly brutal system, right? So I need to overcome that. I need to understand that what I was taught was in that environment of colonialism. The boss was the boss, cannot be questioned. And the boss was a rank, which cannot be questioned. Now I become a boss. Now I have to unlearn toxic behavior, which was imposed on me by a very Machiavellian society. Now I have to go back and relearn emotional intelligence and Ubuntu. So I think that's what I wanted to contribute.
And I love that answer, and I love Ubuntu. And I just share with this for everybody thinking about it. All of us can look back at the history, which is why I say that the social part of this is looking back at history and anthropology. I mean, like ancient humans, what is our nature? What is our history? What's the evolution of that? But if we take a look at South Africa, well, all of Africa, but South Africa as an example, and Nelson Mandela's work and what it took to overcome those misperceptions and the struggle that it took, it's a great kind of representation of emotional intelligence where the perceptions were so polar, so binary, opposite, and lots of different flavors of that. And it takes a lot to overcome that. But we have learned, particularly during the pandemic, we're one species, right? We're one humanity. We're all susceptible to the same viruses. And we now know the human genome only as of the 1990s, and more of it as we know. Genetically, our differences in terms of our skin color, our hair color, our eye color, all the things we can perceive, the tones of voice, our different accents, the pronunciation of names, all of those things are less than 0.01% of what makes us, the human species. And yet that's what we see or react to first. And we think knowing that will help us overcome it. But quite literally, our systems were designed and fed by the cultures and the environments we were raised in to immediately react to different. And we need to learn to overcome that. So all of this is a part of culture if that helps to address it. So I would say anybody who's taking a look at what their preconceived beliefs or notions are, you don't need to change them. You need to be aware of what they are and be aware of what somebody else's are to start down the path of Ubuntu that Toriro suggests. And the other panelists who wanted to provide input in this, Rohit. So if Rohit wants to add to my input and Toriro's input, we'd love to do that.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Toriro. I think those were great inputs. And however, I'll try and add a perspective that we learn in this part of the world from our early childhood, Firstly, yes, cultural background has a very, very important, I think, role in how the EQ develops. And why I say this and why I can reinforce this is that in the Indian literature, you will find many commentators who have done extensive work on celebrating what the world often refers to as Eastern spirituality, right? And which is actually about looking inwards and finding your inner peace and actually celebrating in some way that inner happiness that one can become aware of and then thereafter exploit. Now, that is one part. That is one part of how we grow up in this culture, celebrating the fact that inner joy is to be found here. The Western world, which again, many of these commentators look at overly focused on material efficiency, on on prosperity, and essentially well laid out societies in the way they operate, celebrate a different set of things. So I think the years that we spend as children, as professionals, or as family people against these backdrops have a great impact in how our emotional intelligence develops. In addition to that, there are cultural biases. I think both of you touched upon that. There are biases in the way we look at children, the way we look at maybe millennials now, who are a good part of the workforce, the way we look at the other gender, women. I mean, it's very different how we look at them in some parts of the world versus here. How do we have diverse, work groups with all the different sexual orientations, and how do we look at them? So all of those biases come into play when we are in the realm of using emotional intelligence as a tool in our interactions. So I think I just wanted to add this perspective. Thank you, Steve.
And I love that. It's literally our perception on every topic touching the social venue of the world today is what Rohit is saying. And I totally agree with that, which is what Ubuntu is. It's paying attention to the differences. He used the word bias, and I'm going to build on that before we go to the next question. And Rohit may want to answer this one. He kind of volunteered to, or he may say we've got enough and we move to the next question, because the next question on the list was another one that people really specifically said, we want to ask this one and see what feedback we get. He used the word bias, and I want to point out there's a number of books written in behavioral psychology that talk about the concept of a bias. And a bias is not something that we consciously apply. A bias is something that happens within those two mechanisms, the 0.1, 0.2 second. There's a Nobel Prize winning book called Thinking, Fast and Slow by Kahneman, who first identified all kinds of psychological biases. Now, they were identified by looking at the outcome, the symptom in behavioral psychology more than they were the cause. But now with new technology, functional MRI, we can start to see how they work. And what a bias is when our system looks at something and says it's not same. That's the simplest way to put it. When we just say it's not same as us. And I use one simple visual bias that we all have, which most of us aren't taught as children, because the next question is, how can parents and schools incorporate InQ to teach and to disciplining young ones? And Toriro asked the question. Rohit suggested he might answer it, but I'm going to give a little basis for that. We, as human beings, when we look at other members of our species, whether you tend to be attracted to same sex, different sex, etc., when you look at somebody and decide whether they're extremely pleasing to you visually, we all do this from what's essentially called a bilateral symmetric move. It's literally built into the brainstem. So we look at a person straight up and down, and if they are not symmetrically appealing left to right, we notice the abnormality and it causes us to react. Now, we can laugh at that, but it's the way we all as humans subconsciously. And we've had culturally different cultures that did something to accommodate that. And the biggest example I give is in Japan, where the geishas paint their entire face white and make sure that their makeup is exactly symmetric left and right, and that their clothing or attire is exactly perfect. And the geisha is the epitome of the perfect woman in Japanese culture. And that's because they literally appear to anyone who looks at them bilaterally symmetric 100% of the time. The brain's literally brainstem and emotional reaction always finds that highly pleasing and appealing. And there are lots of cultures today who experiment, and I'm not judging it, with tattoos, with piercings, etc. And as soon as you make yourself not bilaterally symmetric by any kind of attire, the logo that's on your shirt, people notice it because there's not a logo on both sides. And so we instantly notice things that aren't bilaterally symmetric. That's a bias, all right? That's an example of a bias. And there are more than 24 neural biases that humans have that we react to immediately. And some of those cause emotion and some don't. but awareness of those biases is part of what you have to overcome if you want to become proficient, right? And so if you want to help your children or teach somebody that, you have to start understanding the biases that are who we are as a physical being, and those biases that are incorporated into us by our upbringing within our cultures, our tribes, and our societies. So I know I'm answering a lot here, but I'm trying to help tie it together. So Rohit, if you wanted to add more to that, because you volunteered to, please go ahead before we go to the next question.
Yes, Steve, and thank you. I think yours was a very scientific description of what biases can be like. And let me try and make it a little simple and maybe a little abstract for the rest of us who may have, found your explanation a little sort of complex. So I think some of our, one of the definitions of an unbiased mind that has been written about in parts of India is when you look at a newborn child, right? A child that has just been born. Now, every child that stage, looks at the other human being with an equal amount of love. It is open to being hugged by anybody and giving a hug in return, right? Because there has been no layer of conditioning added on that mind yet. Right? So that is the closest in our lives that we can get to an unbiased mind. What happens from that day onwards is that by way of education, by way of our social rules and, family norms and moral values, everything, we put layers and layers of those things on the child's pure self, and therefore those biases come in. But coming to the fact, what can parents do? What can we do as guardians? Maybe I think there are a couple of rules, maybe one or two rules. I'll try and summarize them as I understand it. The first is for parents and guardians to be watchful that children will walk the path that you are walking, right? I mean, they're most likely and unknown to you, they will be following your footsteps. So if you are strong with your emotions or you disregard them, or you swing to one extreme, or from one extreme to the other, it is most likely that they are watching them and they are going to inherit that without you knowing it, without you realizing it, right? The second is about, I think, spending some time training children on the moral and cultural sort of aspects of managing emotions, and the need to recognize emotions in their own peer group, in people who they deal with, in respecting emotions. And thereafter, of course, there are techniques. You touched upon them, Steve, already. That it's an arduous journey. It's not easy. There are, I think, different forms of activities that require different levels of concentration. For one, they lead you to a calm mind to be able to observe and become aware of emotions. So to say, maybe forms of creative activities, even meditation to some extent sometimes, which teaches you to watch emotions of your own and then thereafter of others. And I think the last would be to make them aware of the influence that people around them, their peer group. And I specifically say this for children who go to schools and they see others, and there are many things that they carry back, which is a mix of the complexes that those behaviors have created. And so awareness and discussions around this as parents and guardians, I think, is important in making the child not blindly, sort of fall into the trap of ignoring emotions or not growing up the right way. So thank you so much. That was a long answer. Thank you.
No, but that's awesome. I see a question here about biases, and I was asked to look at the questions. I'm trying to track the questions that are coming in, fast. So I love this. And Priya asked if I'd share a list of the books referenced. I'd be happy to share with her a list of books specifically that focus on emotional intelligence that you can learn. Some of them are early research, some of them are later applications. So I will do that after the session today, so to let everybody know that, so you don't have to capture all of those. And thank you for your answer, Rohit. And I just want to point out, by the time you are a professional project manager, whether you're early or later in your career, you are now working with adults, some of whom came from societies where their parents helped guide them to be unbiased, and where they had educational systems that helped them continue to understand the lack of bias. But most of us, by the time we work with adults, are working with other adults who are not aware of the biases that they've created, either within their physiology and or their social influences. And we come with this huge diverse mixture of perceptions now that we're working on global projects in a global world, not just economy, but socially. And so to be aware, of these differences, they didn't matter as much. I'm not gonna say they didn't always matter. They didn't matter much just in terms of professional interaction until we started to become more of a global economy and global interaction. And almost all of our projects are about humanity across the global space. So we will run into a greater diversity of biases, preferences, rule sets, etc. But we as project managers want everybody to work together, and I'm gonna use the word collaboration, which we know is better than the win-lose or the win-win or the compromise. It's where everybody is finding a more mutually inclusive solution that's better than we could have imagined by simply meeting a need by compromise, for instance. So compromise is not bad, it's just better to get collaboration. But that takes, again, the advanced skills of understanding that all of us have different biases and perceptions coming in. But if we seek, as somebody said early on, the common values, if we look at the common goal and find out where we are same in terms of beliefs and perceptions, rather than focusing on where we're different, we start to find the common ground that allows a team to work collaboratively together. And I don't want to forget, as we talk about this, and I'm responding to this by trying to tie several questions together, we're not just looking about emotional intelligence within the team. We're looking at emotional intelligence with our sponsors, with the vendors, and most specifically with our clients or customers, many of whom have a need they cannot express. And we're trying to figure out how to get them what they need based on what we know and understand. And that's a dialogue that requires emotional intelligence as well. And when we don't deliver what they perceive they need, they will react with emotions as well. So this goes beyond just what we do inside the project team to much beyond that. And so the diversity will all be there. And somebody suggested or asked the question, and I'll do this then to move on to the next big question. One of the questions that was asked just a little while ago is, surely all biases are not bad. Our brains have evolved this mechanism to aid us in our journey as human beings. What biases would you say are good biases? Maybe some biases that will aid us in making correct decisions. As I said, there are lots of biases. They're not all bad. The biases were there to help us survive. So I build on the concept of when we are in a family, when we're in school, when we're in education, we learn certain rules. So there's this challenge between which rules we choose to apply as we move forward, as individuals, as project teams, and as a world, and which rules are now obsolete. And so, if you're a little child running around, you would, as a parent, perhaps say, don't run into the street. Don't cross the road without looking both ways. I mean, we are biased to jump and do certain things or not certain things, but as your ability and your senses improve, those biases that you were fed early don't apply in the same way, yet they are still maintained as survival. And so it's that evolution. I'm going to use the word evolution. There are no bad biases. There are biases we are not aware of that might dictate decisions that aren't the best for the future. So I guess that's another way to look at bias. It's about examining them, being aware and examining them rather than simply reacting to them. So the only bad bias is one that causes you to react and then worry about or reflect on what the consequences were after the fact. So maybe that's a way to define bad biases. We want to avoid those oops biases by reflecting rather than reacting. That's another way to look at it, maybe. The next big question, and Mustafa suggested that he would be willing to answer this one first. Why is it important to be emotionally intelligent in these unprecedented times? And so, Mustafa, if you want to go ahead and try to tackle that one for us first.
So emotional intelligence, when we talk about it, we have IQ, which is not improvable, and we have EQ, which we have just told that it is improvable. And when we talk about unprecedented times, or we have uncertainties, we are going into complex environments. So we have to improve our skills. We have to need something new And the only thing that we can have in our toolkit is emotional intelligence. So that's why in these unprecedented times, we need emotional intelligence. It is not a luxury thing. It's a must. We are in knowledge age. And in this knowledge age, we are not using our muscle power. Now we are using our brain power. So we have to improve the things that are related to our brain so that we can deal with the things which are just coming in the new days, which we will have lots of challenges that we can only deal with them by emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I totally agree. Would any other panelists like to? I think Frenio suggested he might answer this question as well. So if you want to, Frenio, go ahead and add or supplement your input.
Yes, Stephen, certainly emotional intelligence was always important, but in the precedent times that you are living right now, you are facing a situation that you have people working from home that was not used to do before, and they are mixing their personal lives with their meetings and the mix of emotions all the time. And it's very difficult to deal with this situation. Difficult for the people who is living this kind of situation that is in a project dealing with complex tasks, and the children and the lunch and everything they have to do at the same time. And then is only one person, but a lot of emotions that mix during the day. And for the project manager, it's always a difficult task to understand and have empathy to see what is happening on the other side. And try to manage this kind of situation accordingly is possible. That this is a skill like Mustafa told. It's a skill that is new. You don't know how to deal with this the best way at this moment. Then you have to improve. You have to learn and improve every single day, because it's completely different than the word that you have 2 years ago.
Awesome. I will add to it in my a little bit of technical background way here. I love all of the practical application descriptions that the panel is adding to this. If we take a look at how we operate as human beings with our senses, I'm just going to use the chemical in our brain, dopamine. We are designed to be able to take massive sensory input for about 20 minutes. And that's where we have visual, audio, etc. input, where it's coming at us from all the different angles. And we don't, as human beings, multitask well at all. We do what's called fast switching, that our brain goes back and forth between tasks at that 0.1, 0.2 second time, but we switch. But dopamine is critical to allow us to do that kind of fast switching, huge sensory input. And studies show that we deplete the dopamine in the critical parts of our brain that help us fast switch in about 20 minutes. And you say, well, what the heck does that mean, to us as project managers or emotional intelligence? Well, think about this. In our highly complex world, bombarded with email and text messages and Zoom meetings with 6 or 8 or 10 people and all of the questions and answers down the side, it's easy, if you don't focus, to become overwhelmed mentally. And once you deplete the dopamine, it's almost like being on your preferred drug, whatever it might be, alcohol, etc., where you get into a state where the sensory input starts to get shut off by your system and can't get through. And that can be good when we talk about, as Rohit suggested, meditative, some of the Eastern cultures of getting reflective, because you're shutting down those systems to get deeper into the brain for complex thought and problem solving. But if you shut out all the senses, you're now fixed on what your brain can think about. And the chemicals, the way our brain functions, is we're capable of focusing on complex problems for about 90 minutes at a time once we've got overwhelmed, before we have to stop, because literally our brain has neurochemistry and all of the chemicals that our brain uses deplete. And then we have to get up, drink water, get nutrition, walk around, stare at something, go outside, change the environment for anywhere between an hour and 3 hours to replenish our ability to deal with massive sensory input, right? And to be able to solve complex problems. And to Frenio's comment, the practical application, when you're overwhelmed with all this input that causes emotions to change, and all of the visual input in our unprecedented world. And we add to that in our workplace and in projects, we're talking about artificial intelligence and all the data that's coming at us that we have to filter through to help guide ourselves and our teams make big decisions. And it's not about one culture or tribe or team that you work in. You're working with people from all kinds of tribes. That's additional input that we have to filter through. So I totally agree. It's about using our complex mental skills, the cognitive skills. Mankind didn't have to do that when we relied on other people to provide us with whatever we needed. But as we move into this highly complex world that we live in, socially as well as technically, we are forced, if we choose to thrive, not just survive as a species and in our efforts, we're forced to become more aware as individuals in a society of emotional intelligence. And somebody asked the question, what's the difference between managing a project with emotional intelligence and not? I would say this as a definition. Managers make sure that tasks get completed and measure the efficiency and quality of that work. Leaders set a vision. They help understand a common vision, a common goal, a common perception of what the project's trying to achieve, so that people aren't distracted by efforts that would pull them off of the track. And so we have to get into the higher thought. We have to be making choice. We need to be cognitive and complex thought rather than reactive. And so IQ, because it was mentioned, is our ability, is a measurable ability of somebody to solve complex problems, but there's not one IQ test. There's many IQ tests, some for people that are mathematically able to solve complex problems, some that are linguistically able to do it, some that are spatial, three-dimensional. So there's lots of IQ tests that measure somebody's ability to solve complex problems. So IQ is a valuable measurement for people-specific skills. Somebody said they can't be improved, but all of us have the ability to do complex thought in different areas. And it was thought that IQ would help people be successful in a highly industrial environment, but we're talking about IQ for mechanical problems in that space. Now we're talking about an IQ for social problems, and I would equate EQ to being part of that learned. It's a skill that allows us to do that, to be able to use our complex thought. So I'm trying to throw some terms away here or out to all of us as we get into a set of questions that came up. And while I'm going to give each of the panelists the opportunity to kind of answer these questions, different individuals suggested to do that. So there were several questions related to the interpretation of emotional intelligence related to project management behavior or application, or how emotional intelligence is perceived by teams and by people who aren't trained in it. So there's a set of questions that blend together to answer those kinds of questions. And Frenio offered to answer the first question. While he's answering this, I'm sorry if I don't totally listen to it, Frenio, while you're on screen. I'll look through some of the other questions to see if I can't blend some other into this portion of the conversation. And so Frenio offered to answer the question, how can pressure be good?
Great, Stephen. I believe that a project that you have any pressure at all, certainly you have a waste of something, waste of quality, waste of money, waste of resource. Then a certain level of pressure, and you can see a lot of studies doing that, not only in person management, but only in sports, you achieve our best performance. But this is very dangerous, because if you push too much the team, if you put more pressure than you have, that is very tiny situation. It's difficult to tune. You have a disaster. Then a little pressure is good. Put a little pressure is good. Do you have the big performance? But you must know the time of slow down and the time of push again. Slow down and push again. This is something that is a hard skill during a project, but is good. I guess that a little bit of pressure help us to be more creative, to find different solutions. If you have no pressure at all, you do the same thing all the time. Then creative, it came from problems, from situations that you were facing for the first time. You don't have too much time to find to do to the same way they used to do, then this I believe that pressure is good. If you work well with pressure, pressure is good.
Awesome. And I love that answer. And I'm just and Rohit has an answer or a contribution to that. So go right ahead, Rohit.
I would just want to add to what Frenio said, and I totally agree with him. Pressure is good. And sometimes in the corporate world, work only gets done if there is pressure. Otherwise, there's a waste. Now, if you recall, I said I was a veteran and I fought a war. So there are situations of extreme pressure as well, right? And Frenio, you talked about sports. I agree 100% that you can only get good outcomes if you utilize that, if you feel that pressure. But go beyond that, a situation like war, where people die, where enemy shells fall, where bullets fly, there is intense pressure, but it is not because of pressure that people perform there. There is a point, there is a threshold that is reached in such situations where you ought to, as a leader, create a distance between that situation full of pressure and you, to be able to maintain your sanity and balance. And fortunately, and in my own experience, people see this very clearly. When as a leader in the army or as an officer, you tell your men to go and face bullets. Why do they do that? They know there is certain death for at least a few of them, but they do that not because you have pressurized them to do that. They do that because, like I said, a little bit of distance has been created between the situation full of pressure where outcomes need to be achieved. At the same time, a respect for the leader or the need to follow a larger cause which is coming from the leader or for the country or for the society or something like that, and then go and give my life for it. So that is my little addition. Thank you.
Awesome.
May I beg for a little, Steve?
Go ahead, Toriro. We'd love to hear your. Go ahead.
Yeah, because I was reading the chat here, and some people are commenting that when I say that pressure is good, not naturally depend on the situation, depend of the trust that you have your team, and depend the level of pressure. It's not all the time and not in a high level. Like you told, in no war is a different situation. It's completely that. Then you must read the situation and apply accordingly.
I agree. Yeah. So a couple of thoughts on that, just to kind of supplement their examples. Fear, when we talk about emotional intelligence, fear is the most powerful emotion applied in the human sphere. Fear will cause us to either make or not make really bad decisions really quickly because it's all about survival. It is about reaction. The fear of missing out, sales influence, and people making you make a decision immediately rather than allowing you to sit back and think about the alternatives and whether you want to choose to make a purchase or other decision. Fear, when we talk war and soldier, we're all afraid. No one would jump over the wall and go defend their country or attack the enemy with fear unless they were allowed to overcome that basic response, the reaction to dying, etc., unless they were able to get into the deeper mind and figure out the more complex, the perceptions, the behaviors that we desire that cause us to overcome the fear to act. So you have to give people the opportunity to overcome those emotions. And so when we say, when do you pressure, when do you not pressure? Well, we all have a fear of public speaking or a fear of losing or a fear of dying until we overcome that with our more cognitive thought, which is how humanity has survived and thrived, is working together and giving to each other. And so, when we talk about the emotions, if you pressure somebody too hard and you hit the wrong fear trigger, you've closed their mind to using their complex thought to try to overcome the problem. And I'm oversimplifying, but somebody said, how do you teach emotional intelligence to a person, a team, or a firm who are mostly dictators or a monopoly or have no emotional quotient? What you're really talking about, most of those people, is they're operating based upon the fear of losing a job or losing income or the pressures they receive from above, where they don't believe they've been given the opportunity to find a creative solution. And so they're pushing that fear or pressure down on you. So an emotional, intelligent project manager or leader, even if you're not at the top of the organization, you're a leader inside the organization, you're going to be the one that helps them understand what it is they're afraid of so that you can have the freedoms to guide your team to affect positive change. So I'm just kind of, trying to blend that all. And when we say emotions, we fail to recognize when we create an emotion in somebody else or that they possess those emotions anyway. So I hope that helps. The next question, and Toriro and Rohit both suggested that are emotionally intelligent managers, and I'll say or leaders, misunderstood as submissive or non-aggressive. So if you want to address that one, so Toriro is the first one to volunteer for that, and then Rohit, if you want to submit to that.
Thanks, Steve. In my own experience, I've learned the hard way where I went into a different setting from my own. I went into another country where I was working with a team, and it was a different culture and so on. So I came wanting to be the motivator and influencer and so on, and I hit a brick wall. And, you know, I could literally say I failed. Then I realized that it was because I never got the chance to actually learn the culture of the other, the country that I had been, to understand that these people, they need to actually trust you first before you can give them orders or tasks or anything else. So I reckon, although I say it was my own undoing because I did not have the time to learn that culture, but I also say, yes, you can be misread as being weak if you are always trying to motivate people and influence people when there's no trust yet. But when there's trust, yes, well and good. There's no room as such for misreading you as weak. So I would say that in my example, I should have taken time to understand the culture, and also on top of that, I should have been quite more assertive rather than aggressive. I should have been more assertive in the way that I was doing my work. Otherwise, yes, people took advantage of me, I must say.
Got it. Thank you for the input. Rohit offered to give an example or answer that as well. So I'll go ahead and add one there for your opportunity to add to that, supplement that.
Yes, and I think from all our experiences, we may have also seen that sometimes trying to be too considerate of people can be seen as a weakness, right? You could be overly concerned about how the team is going to spend the night solving a complex issue, and in turn, the team may end up seeing you as a soft guy who may accept maybe a poor quality of work or a extended timeline or something like that. So that risk definitely exists. And but I would add that a part of this, the journey to mature your emotional intelligence is also to become aware of when you could potentially be taken for a ride, right? And to be able to sort of intercept those situations beforehand. So, which means that at times you need to be assertive, you need to be firm, but yes, as far as respecting emotions is concerned, you don't need to be rude, you don't need to be angry just to make yourself heard. So maybe a balance between behaviors like this, I think, is the middle way out. Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
I love it. And I will give another example, and I'm hoping not to offend anybody, but this one might make sense because we have panelists from both essentially South America or Latin America as well as India. And this is an example where I had a student in the classroom where I was teaching project management who asked questions about emotional intelligence. And I had a couple of lunches with them to try to solve a problem that emotional intelligence helped to resolve. They worked for a large government contract doing programming, and they had outsourced a number of work to a Latin American company and to a company in India to try to solve problems. And they were having really difficult time with the differences of opinion and approach between the team they had in Latin America and the team that they had in India. And there was a cultural aspect, and there were a number of other aspects in terms of the business agreements, etc. And the example, the way they gave it to me, I'm oversimplifying it for sake of time, is the team in India preferred to try to find and solve their own problems in the code. And that's really part of what was important to them, is being given the opportunity, once a problem was found, to solve it. But in the Latin American culture and the business, you got great kudos when you could find and fix your or somebody else's problem the moment you found it. And so the Latin American team would find a problem and fix it and submit the change, which would be tested and working without communicating with the team in India and giving them an opportunity to review their own code or give input. And it caused huge cultural conflict between the teams in Latin America and in India. And my suggestion for a solution, even though it cost them money, was to quite literally have a team member picked from India who might be open-minded, emotional, intelligent, sent to Latin American company for 3 to 6 months, and pick one from the Latin American company, this was a multi-year contract, sent to the Indian company for the perspective of learning not just how the business is done, but the cultural differences, and report back to their team regularly. And it took about 3 months before suddenly they realized that they were all on the same page. They all had the same skill set, but their perception for how to solve complex problems in terms of approach was based on biases and perceptions. And as soon as they overcame that, team members in Latin America, when they found a problem, rather than jumping on it, would communicate it to the team in India, and whoever it was that wrote the code would collaborate with the person who found the problem, and the team started to work more efficiently, and code actually was delivered in half the time because this fear of emotional difference was overcome. So in this instance, I'm giving an example of work and social preference here. And as we talk about being stepped on, etc., everybody was afraid of being stepped on, so nobody addressed the issue. And so an emotional intelligence approach actually made it more efficient. But we had to help them understand cultural and perceptive differences, not technical differences, in order to overcome it. So I just give that example that tries to blend it together. And it wasn't that the leaders and the team members didn't have empathy for one another. They literally didn't understand the differences with how they were interacting and what impact it had. It was just a lack of awareness.
Yeah, may I add something on that?
Absolutely. Would love to have you do it. Go ahead.
What you have told, actually, David Livermore, in his one of the latest books, called this as cultural intelligence, which starts with understanding other cultures. So from the point of emotional intelligence, I believe that EQ should be supported with CQ in this globalized world.
Yeah, absolutely. Cultural intelligence, when we say CQ, be right, CQ is change intelligence, CQ is cultural intelligence. They're all considered components in psychology of what's called social intelligence, which is, let's understand culture and society. And these are different perspectives. They're really different teaching tool sets to break through barriers for people. And change intelligence, which I'm certified to teach as an example, is literally human beings react to change differently. Some people quickly get into their heads to try to solve a vision or a problem. Some people immediately start doing things with their hands. And other people are the emotional intelligent or heart type, where they try to work with other people for understanding before they start to take action. No approach is wrong, but the blending of the three approaches is more powerful than a single one. So there's lots of tools, but these are all new ideas that have been released since literally 2005. So they're 15 years old, and that's the release of an idea. So part of this panel is starting to introduce people to concepts that are really at the forefront of human understanding. And project management can be at the forefront of introducing not just projects, but the rest of the world to it in terms of how we apply it by example. So I give that one. The next question here, other downsides to being emotionally intelligent, and Mustafa and Toriro both suggested that. So if Mustafa, who's on screen, wants to go ahead and give it, other downsides to being emotionally intelligent. And I'm watching our time to see if we can try to hit as much as possible there.
So sometimes people may call it dark side of being emotional intelligence. But I believe that my experience shows that we don't have actually a downside. The thing that we say, or people say, dark side or downside of emotional intelligence is what people misunderstand what emotional intelligence is. So we talk about empathy. So if you understand or define empathy in a different way that emotional intelligence defines, then people see that the downside of emotional intelligence. Or when we talk about the ability to understand others' emotions or manage social relationships. If you just can't see the right definition that emotional intelligence makes, then people really see this as a downside. So it's all about how we perceive the definitions. From the real definitions of actual definitions of emotional intelligence, I haven't yet seen a downside of this concept.
Awesome. I love that answer. And as we look at this, Toriro, did you have additional input to that one?
Well, I'll put it this way. There's a need for balance between, for instance, collectivism, which is like the culture that I mainly come from, and individualism, which is the culture that was sort of like imposed or borrowed or imported into my culture, right? I wouldn't sort of say individualism is bad as such, but what I would think is that emotional intelligence is the bridge between individualism and collectivism, and I would say the mix has to be there, but with a more bias or leaning towards collectivism, because we are pushing for collaboration. But it's still, a person is still an individual. You still need to look at your own desires and aspirations and such. But when you then bring it into a team effort, for instance, you ought to also understand that there are other people with their own individualistic ideas and so on. So if you are good at emotional intelligence, you balance the two. So as a downside as such, it's difficult to say there's a downside to emotional intelligence. I think it actually helps you to bridge between that individualistic and that collectivism attitude and such.
And I love your input. And I'm going to answer another question that was thrown at us: is can emotional intelligence be misapplied? And so I'm going to give extreme examples of misapplication here, and I'm going to use the word diversity, because diversity is a big deal in the workplace, culturally, sexual orientation, all the different topics, religious diversity, etc. And if we take a look at it, we can go back to a positive where essentially, I'm going to use Gandhi as an example. I could just as easily, go to South Africa, where we found leaders who promoted both, separate rule in India with Gandhi, and individuals having an opportunity to have their input. And so that's a very complex situation that he addressed, right, by trying to be empathetic and setting an example. And there was an extreme cost to him to do that. But he was able to speak to people's hearts and souls and their emotions to get a huge groundswell and a common belief that was a benefit. But we have had in the history of humanity other leaders. I'm going to use Hitler as the most common example, right, where it was all about no diversity, singular, go down, this is the thought, that we follow, and we must all be the same, and anybody who's not like us must be like literally executed. And so there's flavors between the extremes, but it can be misapplied. But I use, again, fear. Fear can be used and misapplied to guide people to do unspeakable, inhumane things. But I'm going to even go beyond that. When we look at anthropology or archaeology and we take a look at humanity and we talk about the survival of the species genetically or socially. I live in the southwestern United States, and we have several Native American tribes that we call the Anasazi, who are no longer with us, those that came before. And we have their huge, cultural buildings and cliff sides, etc., and they just disappeared. And their entire cultures around the world elsewhere that just disappeared. And we try to figure out where they went because they disappeared without a trace. But what we're starting to learn with the newer technologies and understanding today, looking back, is they disappeared because they focused on a single food source, on a single cultural belief. And when the world changed around them, they had not incorporated within their social cultures, from either ideology or food supply, etc., the ability to adapt to alternative ideas. They kept out outsiders. And then when the world changed around them, they did not have within their gene pools, their food supplies, or their environments, or their social beliefs, the ability to adapt. And we take a look back at our genealogy, and that's why I say, you know, our DNA, our genetic differences, we have survived because of blending a very diverse genetic mix, a very different ideological mix. And when we try to exclude diversity into the complex solution, we don't have all of the wealth of ideas and information. And that's how we think. That's the different IQs, that's the different emotions. And we're not used to accommodating massive diversity. And here's the downside. It takes more time to consider the differences. It takes more time to consider diversity rather than just making an opinion and moving on. It takes more time, as Toriro said, to think about the collective as well as the individual, and a solution that considers both. That is a complex solution for humanity, but that's how we'll thrive. I mean, there's more to it, but that's how we'll thrive. So I just kind of, if you take a look at it, the examples and the knowledge you have and the training we all got is, I mean, all of the audience, you have them, but you don't typically apply them to say, how does that affect what we do today and moving forward? We think that technology and everything is different. What's not different is the power of the human mind and the human social system as a whole to adapt and accommodate. And somebody suggest including a woman on the panel next time. I would totally agree with you. It was a matter of who volunteered and who was available, but I would love that. So yeah, absolutely. I totally promote it. So there's an example of, you know, Priya's here. Priya guided all of us, whether you're aware or not. Priya's the one who guided and chaired all of us. So she's not answering the questions, but she's right there on the screen. She's guiding us in the background as well with her input. I believe we've got about 5 minutes to go. So maybe one or two more specific questions. And so I'm going to bring them out to kind of the entire panel. Not everybody has to answer. And I know there's a lot more in Q&A. So Priya, if you want to throw another question in after I throw these two out, please, you know, ask a question or two that you've seen going, I'm sorry we couldn't answer them all. We'll try to get to people with some documentation afterwards to answer additional questions as well. And the two we had that were early to us is, how does EQ specifically apply to agile approaches? And how does EQ affect project teams in a virtual environment? So those are specific applications of EQ. So I'm going to open that to the panel. I know Frenio and Mustafa both had suggestions to answer one or both of those. So if either one of you want to jump in and answer one of those, go right ahead.
Mustafa, feel free.
Go ahead. Frenio, go ahead.
Okay. I would like to talk a little about the virtual world that we're facing at this moment, because most part of the meetings that you have right now, we see dozens of people with the camera off. Is different that you have in the office. I arrive in the office, I could see 40, 50 people at the same time, and I could see their expressions, their body language, and try not to understand their emotions, but see if everything is good or not. If you have a team working on a project and you see everybody concerned, oh, something's wrong, how can I help? But now sometimes you don't see these members of the team anymore. And with the cameras off, sometimes if you ask to open the camera, it's not politely from one side, and from the other side, you don't see what is happening. Then this is very difficult to do with EQ in the team to understand how these emotions is in the project. That's the difficulty that you have at this moment. And I guess that you must not only understand that this is a new reality, but also work the team. That is important to show their emotions. Something in the chat suggested something like starting a project, telling how I am today, how is my mood today. Certainly is a good practice that you can try. And sometimes you start a meeting, don't start necessarily with the subject that you have to do or the tasks, but asking for everybody if everything is okay. That's the way that you have to change in order to guarantee that our projects will doing well, because you don't have the feeling that you had a few years ago. Arriving at least at this moment, I hope that everything's changed in the future. But that is a difficult situation, and EQ is very important for the success of the project. Then is a challenge, I confess that I don't know exactly. I try new techniques every single day, but I couldn't figure out a perfect solution. If someone has, please share with me.
And I will give some input to that, just to open thought with that, because I have a lot of people who don't want to turn their cameras on, and I encourage everybody on my team to do it, and I'll have private conversations if they're not. I'd say, is it about what you look like? Is it about the clothes you wear? Is it about your kids in the background? Whatever it is that you fear to not turn it on, let's find a way to get you to turn it on, even if it's with a virtual background or you see my office behind me, etc. And one-on-ones, you're able to do that, and then you expand people to greater audiences. But I also try to remind people, in today's world, we have all these applications where we look on Facebook, or we try to find, you know, our partners or whatever, where we flick left and flick right by just looking at somebody's picture and their short profile. We are, as we move forward, going to have to figure out how to do that as a species. And the really forward-thinking example I give is, if humanity is going to leave this planet, the only one we call home, or explore the deep oceans or go into space, we're going to have to figure out how to talk to each other through technology and communicate who we are, our differences, our emotions, and our challenges, and overcome those barriers to find answers to complex solutions much more quickly than we do today. So why not be the people who start to, you know, change that environment? It might be uncomfortable, but you'll draw people behind you as leaders. So, I mean, yeah, I think it makes a difference, but understanding the importance of emotional intelligence and seeing each other's faces and why it's important gets other people to follow one or two at a time. And the other one is, and I know we're out of time, I got about a minute. Anybody want to give input on why in an agile environment, you know, how emotional intelligence specifically applies maybe uniquely to an agile environment?
I can give a few comments on that, Stephen.
Sure, go ahead. Thank you, Mustafa.
So my observation in agile teams is that they are they really don't think about getting into planning phase. So looking at that approach, they misunderstand the difference between the plan and the planning. And the planning is the key to communicate, to increase trust. So agility does not mean that we have to discard the planning. So emotional intelligence is needed in terms of increasing the agility, especially in the planning phase.
Awesome. And I'm going to throw one other concept in there, which is based on a lot of that we've talked about today. And I'm disagreeing with the text of the PMBOK 7th edition when we talk about cultures and creating cultures on a project team. And I will emphatically state, as we've discussed today, cultures cannot be created in a short period of time. There are belief systems and there are, you know, essentially perceptions that we have that evolve. So we can influence and help the evolution of a culture, but you can't really create one. And I answer this in respect to an agile team. A team like an agile team, and a team that's asked to be very efficient very quickly and work together with some great intensity, has to be recruited to have common beliefs or perceptions. So you recruit for a culture in that environment, and you allow that team to work together in that, you know, where they understand each other, that emotional intelligence, etc., to affect the efficiency. And you don't break apart an agile team once they've got that efficiency. They stay together as a small, well-knit team, understanding and enhancing their emotional intelligence and their diverse skill sets, etc. So you recruit for diverse skills with common emotional intelligence or beliefs in an agile environment if you want the ideal one. Otherwise, as you start to scale agile, you start to find the conflicts, et cetera, become something that's difficult to manage in a high intensity pressure environment. So you're adding fuel to a difficult situation. That's just another way to think about agile in the framework of emotional intelligence and cultures. I'm turning it back over to Priya to do a wrap up here if you had a final question or comment. Thank you all the panelists. I remind all the attendees again, look all of us up in LinkedIn. We'll try to answer other questions in a set for you, but we're all open to you interacting with us to continue the dialogue. And thank you everybody for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And that was wonderful. And we are getting some wonderful comments coming on the feedback link. One comment is that we should share the reference books on the chat window. That is something that which we lack. So please, Steve, please feel free to add the references that you have referred to in this discussion in the chat. Yes. And before we move on, I would like to call upon Shane, our chapter leader from Phoenix, PMI Phoenix, Arizona. And one question I have for you, Shane. How important is emotional intelligence in building a global virtual community like us?
Well, it's hugely important, Priya. Working with this team has been amazing, and this talk was amazing today. So, emotional intelligence, especially when you're dealing with volunteers, is extremely important. And all the chapter leaders I know will agree with me on that point. Is being able to relate and understand where your volunteers are coming from is extremely important. So. I'd like to thank all of you all for doing a great job today and for being here and volunteering your time, because we all are giving our time for this, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Shane. And wonderfully said. Working with volunteers really need a lot of emotional intelligence, and we really need to improve our emotional quotient. Yes, and with this, I hand over the stage to Brushank to do a small wrap-up of the key takeaways from this session. And yes, over to you, Brushank.
Thank you, Priya. It was a power-packed session, a lot of learnings. I think I could note only a few of it. I learned how EQ is the ability to learn good behaviors and unlearn toxic behaviors. I also now know how cultural background has a significant role in EQ development. We discussed about bias. Bias is not something which we consciously apply, how we instantly notice things which are not bilaterally symmetrical, and why is it important to come out of bias. I was astonished to learn about the chemical reactions happening in the brain all the time and how we are designed to take sensory inputs for about 20 minutes. And just to my surprise, what we do is fast switching, which seems like multitasking. So thank you very much for teaching this to me. From an emotional intelligence perspective, I found the difference between a manager and a leader, and that leaders create a vision so that the team members don't get distracted on other matters. We learned how emotional intelligence helps in high pressure situations, especially like battlefields, and what does it take to remain unbiased and calm to manage these situations. These are the few key takeaways I could make sense. Definitely, I will ponder upon the video once it comes on the link, and try to go back on this again. But what I'm supposed to do now is to thank all the panelists for your time and ideas on this session today. It was a great learning experience for me. I would like to thank all the attendees on the event today for their patient attendance and making most of the time during this session. We would like to know more about how this session has gone for you today. Please give your feedback on the link, which I think Priya has already shared earlier. I would also like to thank Sunil, who is our WebEx admin. I know how difficult this task is and how instrumental he is in making this event smooth as always. Also, thank you, Yuda Pratama, our chapter leader from Puget Sound chapter, for those wonderful flyers that are making noise all through the social media. Thank you, Damike, for the social media posts, getting those things on track. PMI members, please make a note of the PDU code on the screen. A mailer will also be sent to you with the details so that you can on how to claim the PDU, so that you can claim the PDUs. Please try to claim the PDUs at your earliest opportunity. Again, thank you all the attendees and panel experts for this wonderful session. Priya, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Brushank. Very well summarized the discussion. A heartfelt thank again to all the attendees who have attended this session. For some, it is in the middle of the night. For some, it is very, very early morning. And for some, it is almost lunchtime. For people like me, it is Friday late evening. But we do thank you for giving your time and your attention today. With this, we wrap up season 2 of PMI Chapter Exchange. We will be back again in February 2022. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy, and hope to see you soon. Bye.